At 15, my parents kicked me out after my twin sister accused me of stealing her gold bracelet. The door didn't just close, it slammed, and the sound of it moved through my chest like something physical, like a fist. I stood on the porch at 8:14 on a Tuesday night with one duffel bag, soaking rain beginning to spot the fabric, and I remember thinking, with strange detached clarity, I don't have an umbrella. That was the thought my brain offered me when my own family locked me out. Not grief, not rage, just, I don't have an umbrella. Isn't that something? I was 15 years old. I hadn't stolen anything, and it didn't matter. Inside the house, my twin sister Serena was crying. Loud, theatrical, Oscar-worthy crying. The kind she'd been producing on command since we were 4 years old. I knew that cry like I knew my own heartbeat. I'd grown up in its shadow. One tear from Serena's face, and the entire household rearranged itself around her comfort. My mother would materialize from wherever she was. My father would lower his voice and soften his expression and become someone I barely recognized. The world would stop. But this time, she had gone too far, and somewhere between the sound of that slamming door and the cold weight of the rain beginning to soak through my jacket, I made myself remember that with absolute clarity, because I knew in the weeks to come, I would need it. You have to understand what it was like to be the other twin. The other twin. Not a cruel distinction. No one ever said it out loud. But the architecture of our family was built around Serena, and everyone, including me, had learned to live inside it. Serena was everything you'd want in a daughter if you were the kind of parent who needed their child to be a trophy. She was beautiful in the way that made strangers comment on it unprompted. She'd been dancing since she was 3, and by 13 she had medals and photos and a specific shelf my mother kept dusted in the living room. She was charming when charming served her, brittle when it didn't. And she had an instinct, I can only call it an instinct because I never saw her calculate it, for making adults feel like they were protecting her. Every conversation she walked into, she walked out of as the victim. I was the other one, Lily, quieter, better at school, which nobody cared about, good at reading people, which turned out to be both a gift and a specific kind of loneliness. I wasn't ugly or miserable or friendless. I want to be clear about that. But in our house, I was the moon to Serena's sun. Present, visible if you looked, easy to overlook if you didn't. We shared a room until I was 12. When my parents converted the small office into a second bedroom for me. It was half the size of Serena's room. I painted it blue without asking permission, and nobody noticed for 3 weeks. The bracelet was gold, 18 karat, a thin chain with a small disc engraved with Serena's initial. My grandmother had given it to her for her 14th birthday. Not to both of us, just to Serena, which my mother explained was because Serena had a special bond with Grandma Rosette. I had nodded and gone back to my room and sat on my blue painted wall for a while, not crying, just cataloging. I was good at cataloging by then. Serena wore the bracelet sometimes and forgot about it other times. She lost things constantly. Earrings, chargers, school IDs, permission slips. There was always a reason it wasn't her fault. The point is, the bracelet going missing was not, in and of itself, a remarkable event. What was remarkable was what she chose to do with its absence. The accusation came on a Thursday. I remember because I had a history test the next morning, and I was at the kitchen table with my notes spread out, and Serena came downstairs holding her wrist like it was injured and said, "To no one and everyone, has anyone seen my bracelet?" I said no, and went back to my notes. My mother looked. They checked the bathroom, Serena's dresser, the little ceramic dish by the front door where we dropped keys. They didn't find it. Serena made the sound she made when things didn't go her way, not quite crying, more like pressurized breathing, and went back upstairs. I finished my notes and went to bed. Friday morning, normal. Saturday, normal. I took my history test. I probably got a B. Nobody asked. Sunday afternoon, everything changed. I was in my room reading when I heard Serena's voice downstairs, that particular pitch she used when she was performing distress for an audience. I heard my mother's voice, calm and questioning. Then my father's voice, which had a different register when he was being called to adjudicate something. I heard my name. I came to the top of the stairs. "She took it," Serena said. She was standing in the living room with her arms wrapped around herself. Universal Serena watched her from I know she did. She's always been jealous of it. My father looked up at me on the stairs. His expression was already halfway decided. That's the thing I've thought about most in the years since. Not that he made a wrong choice. People make wrong choices, but that the choice was so fast. There was no moment of consideration. There was no version of his face that entertained the possibility Serena might be mistaken. He looked at me and his expression was already a verdict. "Did you take your sister's bracelet, Lily?" "No, she says you did." "Then she's wrong." He told me they were going to search my room. I said, "Go ahead." They found nothing. Of course they found nothing. There was nothing to find. But instead of that absence of evidence producing doubt in my sister's accusation, it produced a new theory. I must have hidden it somewhere else, or given it to a friend, or thrown it away out of spite. Serena offered all of these alternatives with the helpfulness of someone who has already decided on the conclusion, and is simply working backward to reach it. My mother stood in the doorway of my room while my father went through my dresser drawers. She wouldn't look at me. I watched the side of her face the whole time. The careful blankness of a woman who has chosen a side, needs to not examine that choice too closely. That blankness, that was what I couldn't forgive. Not right away, but eventually, and then permanently. Admit what you did, my father said, and we can talk about this like a family. Until then, you need to leave. I was 15 years old. I had a history test that week. I had a library book on my nightstand. I had a best friend named Camille who I was supposed to go to the movies with on Saturday. None of that mattered. None of that was part of the calculation. I didn't take anything. Then you're choosing to be dishonest. That's your decision. He pointed at the door. My mother said nothing. Serena was in the hallway behind them. I looked at her over my father's shoulder. She wasn't crying anymore. She had the expression of someone who has been watching a chess match and finally seen their preferred outcome take shape. Not happy exactly. Settled. Resolved. Like something had been corrected. I was given 1 hour to pack. My hands shook the entire time. Not from crying. I didn't cry. Not then. But from something more primitive. Some physical response to a threat that my body recognized before my brain had fully processed it. I put in clothes, my laptop, my phone charger, the library book, my retainer case, the $23 I had in my desk drawer. I stood in the middle of my blue room and turned in a slow circle and tried to think if I was forgetting anything important. I picked up a photo of myself and Camille from a hiking trip we'd taken the summer before. I packed that too. I had 1 hour. My hands shook the whole time. Not from crying, from something older than crying. I sat on the front porch in the beginning of the rain and called Aunt Diane. Diane was my mother's younger sister, 41 at the time, a family law attorney in a city 4 hours north of ours, divorced, no children, and possessed of a particular quality I had always admired without having the vocabulary to name. She was completely immune to performance. You could not perform for Aunt Diane. She watched people for a living, and she had seen every variation of manipulation and self-deception that human beings produce, and none of it landed on her. She was not unkind. She was just clear, precisely, reliably, usefully clear. She picked up on the second ring. Lily, what's wrong? I hadn't said anything yet. She heard it in the silence. Come get me, I said. My voice was very quiet. The rain was starting to come down harder. Please. A pause. 3 seconds maybe. Are you safe? Yes, I'm on the porch. Why are you on the porch? They kicked me out. Another pause. Different quality. Don't move. I'm coming. She drove 4 hours through a storm in her silver Honda CR-V, and when she pulled up to the house at nearly midnight, she didn't even look at me first. She walked straight past me and knocked on the front door, hard, 3 times. My father answered. He looked genuinely surprised to see her. Show me the proof, Diane said. Her voice was calm in the way that very cold things are calm. What happened at that door, I have reconstructed from what I heard and what Diane told me later, because I was sitting on the porch steps with my wet duffel bag and I could only make out pieces. My father explained the situation, the bracelet, the accusation, the search of my room. His voice had the cadence of a man confident in his righteousness, laying out a reasonable sequence of events. Diane let him finish. Then she asked Serena, who had apparently appeared in the doorway, drawn by the drama, the same way she was always drawn by the drama, exactly where she had last seen the bracelet. My dresser, Serena said. And you went through everything on your dresser? Every drawer? Every jacket pocket? Every bag? Pause. Long pause. She took it, Serena said. I know she did. That is not evidence, Diane said. That's a feeling. And you, this next part I heard clearly because she raised her voice just enough, threw your 15-year-old daughter out of the house and into the rain over a feeling. That last sentence was for my parents. I heard my mother make a small sound. I heard my father start to say something and stop. Diane came back down the steps, picked up my duffel bag and said, "We're leaving." She didn't look back at the house. She opened the car door for me, put my bag in the trunk, and got in the driver's seat, and we drove north through the rain in almost complete silence while I sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway lights smear across the wet windshield. After maybe an hour, she said, "You're going to be okay." Not a question. A legal argument. Filed on my behalf. I nodded. "You're allowed to be angry," she said. "I am." The weeks that followed had a quality I still struggle to describe. Something between relief and grief, like a wound that has finally stopped being touched. Diane's house was a 2-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood with wide sidewalks and oak trees that were turning color. It smelled like coffee and wood and the particular clean smell of a home occupied by someone who was comfortable being alone. Quiet in a way my house never was. No performance. No scorekeeping. No invisible hierarchy being reasserted at every meal. She gave me the guest room, which had a real desk and a window that looked into the backyard. She enrolled me in Northside High School that following Monday, walked me in herself, spoke with the registrar, Mrs. Helene Cross, who was 60-something and efficient, and took my provisional enrollment in stride because apparently Diane sent her an email the night before explaining the broad strokes of the situation. This was how Diane operated. She solved problems in advance. She papered everything. "Your transcripts are strong," Mrs. Cross told me, flipping through a printout. "You'll have no trouble with the coursework here." I nodded. Nobody had told me my transcripts were strong before. My parents had noticed Serena's dance medals. My grades were mine alone, which meant they existed in a particular kind of silence. The school was bigger than my old one. The hallways had a different smell. Industrial cleaner and something cafeteria adjacent. I was new in November, which is not an ideal time to be new, but I had a strange advantage. I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't the other twin. I wasn't the invisible one. I was just a girl who transferred mid-semester, a little quiet, reading during lunch until a girl named Priya sat down across from me and said, "That book is a masterpiece, but the ending is a crime against humanity." And I laughed, genuinely. The first real laugh I'd produced in weeks. Priya became my person at Northside, funny and sharp and entirely uninterested in social theater. She had strong opinions about everything and wanted yours. She was the kind of friend who made you feel like your thoughts were worth having. I started doing well in school, not to prove something, not to compete with Serena's medals, but because for the first time, learning felt like it belonged to me. Mr. Osei taught AP history with the kind of intensity that made you feel like the past was urgent. Ms. Narang ran the debate team and told me, after I sat in on a session, that I had a lawyer's brain. I told her my aunt was a lawyer. She said, "That tracks," and handed me a practice brief. Every night, Diane sat at the kitchen table while I did homework. Not helping. She was usually working on her own files. Her reading glasses pushed a half-finished cup of tea beside her laptop, but present, available. The radical, ordinary gift of an adult in the room who is simply on your side. She made me eat breakfast before school. Non-negotiable. She asked about my day and listened to the actual answer, not the polite one. She went to parent-teacher conferences in February and came home saying Ms. Narang had called me analytically gifted, and she said it with such genuine, unperformed pride that I had to look away from her face. I realized, slowly and then all at once, that I had been exhausted for years. Not tired, exhausted. The bone-level fatigue of someone who has been holding themselves together in a space where they are not safe. And now, suddenly, I wasn't holding. And the thing I felt in the absence of that tension was so unfamiliar it took me weeks to name it. Safe. I felt safe. I stopped flinching when adults spoke to me. I hadn't even known I was flinching. My parents called occasionally, my mother more than my father. The calls were brief and strange. She asked how I was. I said fine. She said okay. There was a silence that neither of us knew how to fill. She never said, "We made a mistake." Not yet. She said things like, "We miss you," and "Serena asks about you," which I filed away in the same careful place I'd always filed things that didn't make sense but felt important to document. Diane let me decide how much contact I wanted. She never pushed me toward reconciliation. Never pushed me away from it. She was, in this as in everything, perfectly calibrated. She gave me the case files and let me make the argument. 7 months after the door slammed on a Wednesday evening in late spring, my mother called while I was at the kitchen table finishing a paper on the Reconstruction era. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Lily. Her voice had a different quality than the previous calls, stripped of something. Thinner. "We found the bracelet." I set my pen down very carefully. It was in Serena's coat pocket, the one she wore to her recital in September. "We found it when she was cleaning out her closet." I said nothing. "She must have put it there and forgotten." She didn't. My mother's voice did something complicated. A small catch she pushed through. "She didn't mean to. She let them kick me out," I said. My voice was completely level. "I noticed that. The way you notice something interesting about a specimen you're studying. Completely level." She watched me pack my bag. She heard Dad tell me to get out. She saw me sitting on the porch in the rain. "Lily." And she said nothing. For 7 months, she said nothing. Silence. "We're so sorry, sweetheart." Her voice broke on the last word. Genuinely, I think. I believe my mother's sorrow was real. I just could not find anything useful to do with it. "I know you are," I said, and I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a moment. The paper on Reconstruction was open in front of me. Diane came in from the other room. She'd been reading, I think. She was still holding the book. And looked at my face and said nothing. Just put a hand briefly on my shoulder and went to put the kettle on. We drank tea. I finished my paper. It was a good paper. I got an A- on it. And Ms. Narang wrote exceptional use of primary sources in the margin. And I stuck it to the corkboard above my desk next to the photo of me and Priya from the fall debate tournament, where we'd placed second. These are the things I remember from that night. Not my mother's voice breaking, the tea, the paper, the ordinary solid proof that my life was mine now. The months after the phone call had their own texture. My parents wanted to reconcile, my mother especially. She called more often. She sent letters, actual handwritten letters, in her careful looping script. She said, "We should have believed you. We should never have let you walk out that door. We failed you, Lily, and I am sorrier than I know how to say." I read every letter. I kept them in a folder. I didn't know yet what I wanted to do with them. Diane helped me think through it. Not what to decide, but how to think about the decision. "Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing," she said one evening, when I'd been quiet for a long time over dinner. "You can have one without the other." I thought about that for weeks. Serena did not call. Serena did not write. This was, in its own way, informative. My sister, who had produced tears on cue for an audience of 2 at every moment of her life, could not manage to pick up a phone when the audience was just me. I had been carrying her for years, I realized. Carrying the weight of being the less seen one, the uncelebrated one, the one whose absence could be explained away. I'd made myself smaller to accommodate her largeness. I'd been grateful for crumbs of attention and called it a family dynamic. And now, in a house where no one needed me to be smaller, I was discovering, tentatively, with occasional backsliding, that I was actually quite a bit. I made the debate team at Northside. I was the only sophomore on varsity. Mr. Osei nominated me for the state history essay competition, and I placed in the top 10, which meant a small trophy and a check for $400 that I put in a savings account Diane helped me open. I started running on the wide sidewalks under the oak trees, not because I was sad, because it turned out my body liked moving, and I had never had the space or safety to notice that before. I turned 16 in Diane's kitchen, with a lemon cake she'd made from scratch and Priya sitting across the table, wearing a ridiculous paper crown she'd made herself and singing badly. It was the first birthday in my memory where I hadn't spent some portion of it thinking about Serena. I was not healing from my family. I was growing into myself. There is a difference. I allowed my parents back slowly, on terms I set. Coffee with my mother in the spring of my junior year, at a neutral cafe midway between Diane's town and theirs. She looked older than I remembered, softer around the eyes. She held my hands across the table and said, "Tell me who you are now." And I believed she meant it, and I told her some of it, the parts I was willing to share. My father was harder. He was a man built for authority, and the experience of being wrong had made him quiet and strange. He sent a card for my 16th birthday that said, "I am proud of you every day, even when I have not earned the right to say it." I read it 4 times. I put it in the folder with my mother's letters. I didn't hate them. I want to be clear about that. Hate is a kind of attachment. What I felt was more like the particular ache of understanding exactly what someone is capable of. Not worse than they are, not better, just precisely and irreversibly accurately. I saw my parents, finally, at actual resolution, and I loved them, in the way that you love things that are genuinely what they are, and no more. I let them come to my junior recital, which was a debate showcase, not a dance performance. They sat in the middle rows. They applauded. My father looked, for the first time I could ever remember, slightly uncomfortable in his own authority, like a man aware that he is a guest in something he no longer controls. That felt important. I filed it carefully. Senior year, Northside, debate captain, AP Literature, AP Government, AP History. Applications to 6 schools, all of them good, 2 of them exceptional. Diane reviewed every essay with the focused attention she brought to a legal brief. She told me the personal statement I wrote about the night she drove 4 hours in a storm was the best thing she'd read in years. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. And that matter-of-factness was more persuasive than any flourish would have been. Priya and I applied to the same 3 schools. We promised each other it wouldn't matter where we each ended up. It didn't. We both got into our first choices, different schools, and screamed into the phone at each other for 4 minutes straight on decision day. Graduation was a Thursday in June. The gym smelled like industrial cleaner and corsages and that particular anxious excitement of a room full of people on the edge of an ending. Diane arrived 45 minutes early in a yellow dress, bright canary yellow, fitted, with earrings she'd had in a box for years, and decided this was the occasion. She had been talking about the dress for weeks. She sat in the front row, center, with the quiet authority of someone who has earned the front row. My parents came too. They had asked, and I had said yes, and they came. My mother in a blue wrap dress, my father in his good suit. They sat near the back. I had suggested near the back. They didn't argue. We lined up in the hallway, alphabetical by last name, and I stood between a boy named McIntosh who kept loosening his tie, and a girl named Mercer who kept tightening hers. I looked down at my hands. They were not shaking. That felt like something worth marking. When they called my name, Lily Ann Morgan, I walked across the stage, took the diploma from Principal Hennessy, shook his hand, and looked out into the rows. I did not look for my parents. I looked for the yellow dress. She was already standing, before anyone else, before the applause even built around her. Just Diane, in the front row, in canary yellow, on her feet, both hands raised in a clap that was not performative or showy, but simply complete. The clap of someone who has been waiting for this specific moment and is fully, genuinely, wholly present for it. I let myself look at her for 3 whole seconds. Then I walked off the stage. Afterward, in the parking lot, my mother found me. She put her arms around me and she smelled exactly the same perfume, the same fabric softener, the same specific smell of my childhood. And I stood in that embrace and felt all of it, the grief and the love, and the particular ache of a thing that is finished and also somehow still ongoing. I let it land. I didn't rush it. Then I thanked her, gently, and stepped back. And I walked across the parking lot to Diane, who was talking to Priya's parents, and I took her hand, and she looked at me and said, "You ready?" And I said yes. And we walked to her silver CRV, and we drove away in the June evening with the windows down. That night, somewhere around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Serena, congrats. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I read it. All 8 words. I thought about them for a moment with the same careful attention I'd bring to a legal brief or a debate argument, assessing the claim, weighing the evidence, considering what, if anything, I owed the premise. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand. I lay back on the pillow. Through the window, the oak trees were just visible against the dark sky, leaves barely moving. The house was quiet. Diane was downstairs, I could hear the faint sound of her TV. She watched old British procedurals when she wound down, preferred them to anything American. The familiar sound of a house that had kept me safe for 3 years, and I slept deeply, without interruption, without the low-grade vigilance I'd maintained for so many years, the half-awake monitoring of my own position in the family, the listening for footsteps, the anticipation of the next thing to be wrong with me. None of that. Just sleep. Like someone who owed the world absolutely nothing. Here is what I know on the other side of it. My parents were not monsters. They were people who had built a family around one child's light and forgot that the other one needed light too. That is a common failure. It is a real one. And the fact that it is common does not make its consequences less permanent. Serena was not evil. She was a girl who had been taught, from the time she was very small, that her feelings were more important than other people's facts. That is a dangerous education. The bracelet incident was not a calculated scheme. I have come to believe that. She accused me because she felt certain, the way people feel certain when certainty is all they've ever been given permission to exercise. And then, when she found out she was wrong, she couldn't face it. That is a different kind of failure. No less real, no less costly. My mother wrote me a letter, the year after graduation, that I still have. She said, "I stood at the door of your room while your father went through your drawers, and I could not look at you, and I have thought about that moment almost every day since. I was a coward. I chose the easier child to believe. I don't expect you to forgive that. I only want you to know I see it." I wrote back, "Not immediately, but eventually." We have since then rebuilt something, smaller than what we had, more honest, more carefully tended. It requires maintenance. It is worth it most days. Some days it isn't. I hold both of those truths without needing to resolve them. My father and I talk on the phone every few weeks. He has become, in his late middle age, quieter and more attentive, the way people sometimes become after a significant loss that was entirely their own fault. He asks good questions now. He listens to the answers. I do not know if it is enough. I do not know if enough is a useful standard. Serena and I have not spoken. Perhaps we will, one day. Perhaps the text she sent me on graduation night was real and she has more to say. Perhaps I have more to hear. But that is a conversation for another version of myself, in another season, when I have decided I have the space for it. I don't owe that conversation to anyone's timeline but my own. Diane and I talk every week. She still makes me eat breakfast when I visit, still non-negotiable, still delivered without sentimentality. She came to my first debate championship in college and sat in the front row in a different dress, this one green, and stood up when they called my name before anyone else in the room. I am 22 now, writing this from my apartment, which has blue walls. I painted them without asking permission. Nobody has failed to notice for 3 weeks. What I want to tell you, if you are reading this and you recognize any of it, the being overlooked, the being blamed for something you didn't do, the door that slammed, the rain, the bag that got wet while you waited, is this: the people who were supposed to protect you may not have. That is a real thing. It will have real consequences in you, some of which you are still discovering. You are allowed to be angry about it for as long as anger is useful to you. You are allowed to stop being angry when it isn't. And somewhere, in most cases, not always, not perfectly, but often, there is an Aunt Diane, someone who is not obligated, someone who drives 4 hours in a storm anyway, someone who picks up your wet bag and doesn't look back.